going nowhere. These planes have been grounded. Flybe's collapse ending its promise it's faster than road or rail. The terminal at its headquarters in Exeter looking like a ghost town. Flybe has become Britain's first corporate casualty as the effects of the coronavirus spread to the wider economy, leaving thousands stranded and 2,000 people having to say their goodbyes to colleagues.
This is a very devastating blow for Exeter, for the southwest region, but also for air connectivity in the United Kingdom as a whole. A dreadful day for the staff and the families affected. A lot of uncertainty for passengers who've lost their flights, and also question marks as to how and why the government let this happen.
Coronavirus has ravaged global air travel as business users stay at home and tourists avoid flying. Some airlines telling us passenger numbers have dropped 50%. Today, the industry said that up to $113 billion could be lost in revenues because of corona, with British Airways, Lufthansa, EasyJet and Ryanair all grounding hundreds of routes. But Flybe's problems go back a long way. It handled 40% of the UK's domestic flights and prided itself on connecting 9 million passengers a year across British towns and cities like Southampton, Exeter and Newcastle. But it struggled to stay competitive, and now coronavirus has proven the final straw. Just 2 months ago, Transport Secretary Grant Shapps declared he was delighted the government could step in to rescue the airline. Today, in the House of Commons, the government's message was very different.
Unfortunately, in a competitive market, companies do fail, and it is not the role of government to prop them up.
But there was criticism that the government was falling short on its own commitment to level up and boost prosperity in the regions. The company had wanted a £100 million loan from government, as well as a promise to reform airport taxes in next week's budget. Out of 120 of Flybe's routes, 88 are not flown by any other airline, with insiders claiming many are a vital public service.
For the government to be taken seriously in its pledge to level up the regions, it really does need to take urgent action to improve the connectivity and resilience of our transport infrastructure, not just in this region, but in all of the United Kingdom's left behind and peripheral regions.
Flybe's demand heaps more pressure on the new Chancellor, who is hoping to make levelling up the centrepiece of next week's budget.
Lots to get on with. Thanks very much.
He was going to be the good news Chancellor, launching the biggest investment spending spree in 40 years and rewarding Labour convertees. But 3 weeks into the job, and Rishi Sunak has found himself with an embarrassing failure on his hands and a global economic crisis knocking on the door. This week, the government said that 1 in 5 people may have to stay home from work. Today, HSBC, the latest to ask employees to work remotely. With companies across most industries bracing themselves for a supply chain shock, many are hoping for emergency measures.
Governments need to step in. They need to cut taxes and to spend more, particularly targeted spending to help businesses and individuals who might be adversely affected by the coronavirus.
Some economists believe that inside the Treasury, they're dusting off battle plans from the 2008 financial crisis, including offering loan guarantees and pausing company tax bills. The package could be worth £5 billion in a budget that is already testing the limits of the government's own spending rules. That will all come too late for Flybe, but it's unlikely to be the last corporate failure brought on by the mounting impact of the coronavirus. In the chaos, dreams of solving Britain's deep-seated economic inequalities risk being grounded too.
Well, some regional airports have been hit particularly hard by the demise of Flybe. At airports like Southampton and Cardiff, it was responsible for the vast majority of business. Our reporter Anya Popp is at Belfast George Best City Airport, where Flybe was responsible for 77% of the flights. Anya, a big blow there.
Well, yeah, the routes that Flybe often did were the ones in poorly connected areas, and no more is that apparent than here in Northern Ireland, where the only way to get to the rest of the UK with any speed is by air. politicians here point out that overnight they've lost 25% of connectivity via the air. And at this airport in central Belfast, ground staff have been milling around all day in an almost empty airport. 82 Flybe flights were meant to leave here today. The chief executive here said he was unsurprised that the coronavirus has had such a devastating effect on an already weakened airline. He said last month in February they'd already noticed a 9% drop in passengers, which they put down to the coronavirus. Obviously this month, after today's news, they're going to notice even more. They said that the government needs to take action if they're serious about helping the regions.
For Northern Ireland, regional connectivity is absolutely vital. You cannot do a day's business by any other means than air travel. So I spoke this morning to our First and Deputy First Minister. I've spoken to our Secretary of State, and I've emphasised that it is absolutely vital that the government move on air passenger duty to stabilise the industry and to make sure regional connectivity is maintained.
Of course, when an airline goes under, a whole region is affected. We spoke to somebody in the hospitality industry that said businesses had already been cancelling conferences after the warning shots from Flybe in January because of fear that what happened today would happen and that they wouldn't be able to get here. Other businesses like the construction industry, which rely on connectivity to the rest of the UK, said they'd already been under pressure in the last year or so.
We've got Brexit and the particular problems that causes here for Northern Ireland. We've got coronavirus, we have a whole series of other challenges, and now on top of that we have 25% of our connectivity with the rest of the UK lost overnight. This government is promising us a bridge between here and the rest of the UK. This airline is our bridge, this is our motorway, this is our rail line. We don't have any of those other connections.
Well, some good news here. 2 of the routes that Flybe were serving have already been stepped in by another airline. And the chief executive here says they've been working on with other airlines in the recent months to try and make sure that they're not without these routes for very long. And he says he hopes to announce more in the coming weeks. And with that, he hopes some of the jobs that have been lost here today will come back to the area.
Thanks very much, Anya.
Well, earlier I spoke to Brian Strutton from the British Airline Pilots Association, and I put it to him that surely the collapse of Flybe was somewhat inevitable.
I don't accept that, actually. I know that some other people in the industry have said that, almost trying to force Flybe out of business, sadly, but I don't see it that way. And in January, the government didn't see it that way either. The government said there's enough of a business proposition here, an important one for the country, that we would help to make Flybe survive. But they've done a U-turn since then, which is why Flybe's gone into administration. Do
you think the government should have thrown more money at the airline?
No, they didn't need to throw money at it. What they said in January was that they would support a competitive loan, and they would help with air passenger duty, which is the special tax that airlines have to pay. That would have been sufficient, I think, to keep the owners putting their money into the Flybe pot as well. That would have been good enough to keep Flybe operating. They had a new business plan they could have followed. I really would like to know why the government changed its mind.
So that's interesting. Having decided to help the airline controversially at the end of last year, they're basically not here to help you now, or help the airline now. What do you think motivated them to change their mind?
I don't know. I think they've sort of tried to pin that on the effect of the coronavirus. But I'm looking at the change in the senior ministers that were involved. There's been a change of Chancellor between those two events. There's been a change of business secretary between those 2 events. Maybe it's more to do with that than it is to do with anything else. But I think we do need to have the answers, because one day government's going to support Flybe because of its regional connectivity. It's important to the economy. Another day, no, we're not. We're walking away from it.
But considering the fact that all other airlines at the moment with this coronavirus are struggling, why should the government at this stage help Flybe?
Well, I think there are a couple of reasons, really. First and foremost is the reason the government gave itself, which is there are important public service routes that Flybe operates that no other way that anybody can provide the transport for, that Flybe supports a number of regional airports like Cardiff, Southampton, Belfast City, Exeter. really are, virtually all Flybe, and there'll be no connectivity without them in place. I think also as well, all industry is going to be looking at the effects this summer. I know that in aviation, a number of airlines are already taking cost-cutting steps, and Flybe could have done the same. There's no reason why it couldn't have survived.
It's also possible, is it not, that if the government had decided to help Flybe again in these more dire straits than they were at the end of last year, then other airlines like Virgin and British Airways could say, well, hang on, what about us? We're also losing passengers and market share because of this virus. And they can't help everyone.
Well, no, they can't. But what the government was looking at was not giving a free cash handout to Flybe, but arranging a commercial loan, relaxing air passenger duty, and actually every single airline has asked for the same relaxation of air passenger duty. My point is that there was plenty there that could have been done viably to keep Flybe going, or at least substantial parts of it. And why wasn't that looked at when government was changing its mind about the general support for the company?
So let me ask you finally, Brian, do you think there's a conspiracy here between some of the other airlines, Flybe's competitors, and the government to basically sacrifice you on the altar of this virus and indeed a business in trouble in order to get hold of some of these routes themselves?
Well, I don't have any evidence of a conspiracy as such, but it is interesting that other airlines were coming out publicly saying that Flybe should go under and threatening to challenge the government's decision that it made in January, and then the government does a U-turn on it. But
so you're agreeing with that proposition?
No, but rather than guesswork, I think we should have answers, and I think government should explain why it changed its mind.
Brian Strutton, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.